Welcome to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Mini First Aid are the UK's leading family first aid provider, and we are delighted to bring our latest podcast series to you, giving you all the information that you need around family health subjects. Thanks for joining. The Family Health Podcast is brought to you in partnership with Things Happen, a trusted financial advisor that supports new parents and their families. Things Happen offer the best advice to help parents and their families make informed financial decisions, ensuring a secure and tax-efficient future for their children. The team at Things Happen are highly qualified financial experts who will guide you through the different types of policies to consider as your family expands, taking the stress out of decision-making by finding the best deals for your needs, ensuring you and your family are protected no matter how busy life gets. If you already have life insurance, Things Happen will carefully review your existing policy to ensure that it still meets your family's evolving needs, so you know your family is fully protected. Hello, my name's Kate and I'm the founder of Mini First Aid. I'm also the host of our Family Health podcast. Thank you for joining us. We are pleased, always, that you've taken the time to listen to our Family Health podcast, whether you're in the car, you're doing the cleaning, or perhaps you're even having that luxurious relaxation with a cuppa. Our Family Health podcast covers a huge range of topics that might affect one of your family members. And if you've ever got a family health concern and are thinking, I'm going to Google it, please don't. Listen to us instead, and we'll have the answers that you need. So, without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our guest this week. Jamie Shires is joining us today to discuss with us imposter syndrome. But let me tell you a little bit about Jaimie. Jamie's an experienced counsellor, a mental health trainer, and she's also the member of the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. Wow. Jamie's going to talk to us today about imposter syndrome, as I said, and the inner critic. And don't we all know it? And I personally can't wait for this one. So Jaimie, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kate. Happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do then.
Well, I think the easiest way to describe what I do is I help people through different stages of personal change. And I provide the right environment and relationship to allow them to explore things and allow them to adapt to those changes in the best way possible.
Brilliant. I think most of us have heard of imposter syndrome. There's probably people nodding along, listening now. Just for anyone that's gone, I've just tuned in and I'm not really sure what it is. Can you explain what imposter syndrome actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. So imposter syndrome is a mindset of focusing on lack or feeling that one is lacking a skill, experience, intellect, that one is lacking in some way. And alongside that, there's also a feeling that others around probably are more competent or more skilled. So, it is coming from a place and a feeling of maybe not worthy of success or lacking in self-worth in some way.
Am I right in thinking that this affects more women than men, or is that just a myth?
I think it's a myth, though. When the phenomena of imposter syndrome first kind of came to the light in the late 70s, it was predominantly women that were being, studied and it was really kind of prominent in women at that time. And we can understand why, because women were relatively new in the workforce, compared to men in the late 70s. So there was a feeling of, maybe not skilled enough, not intellectual enough in this kind of man's workforce. However, as time has moved on, roll on 40 years later, studies are showing actually that it's an internal experience that both men and women, feel. It doesn't matter, it's equally split between the genders, let's put it that way.
Can it impact you regardless of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can call it in its most simplest form. It's an insecurity, and it's a universal insecurity of feeling that one is, of lack. Like we're lacking something that others have. So that's quite a universal. It doesn't matter what background you come from. That feeling of lack can happen in anyone, really.
Does it affect children and teenagers as well? We are talking about the whole family today, so it'd be interesting to know.
I think, definitely teenagers and in some children, depending on their level of self-awareness.
Okay.
But in teenagers, because they're more self-conscious and they're constantly comparing themselves to their peers, I would say it's where we probably see it develop first. It's that comparative thinking, and that combined with a feeling of I'm not as good as so and so, or as others at this particular, it could be sport, it could be academics, it could be anything, and that's, I think, where that pattern first forms.
Makes me feel really sad to hear you say that, that we desperately want to cushion our teens, don't we? And to think that they can experience it as well. What causes imposter syndrome then, Jaimie? What makes it? What triggers it? What can make it happen for individuals?
Well, it's really due to social and cultural conditioning.
Okay.
The renowned psychologist Carl Rogers, who's the father of a particular form of psychotherapy, he called it conditions of worth. And I think that's a really great term to describe it, because, conditioning is, the messages, the belief systems that we internalize or that we learn, right, from the social structures that are in place. So we learn as individuals, what are the rules for success? What is acceptable and unacceptable in our society, in our culture? And what we're learning, and what the message that our society is kind of giving out, that we're really buying into, is that our value comes from comparison. Our sense of self-worth is based on a comparative model where we're constantly comparing ourselves against others, and we're either measuring up or we're measuring below. We're either winning or we're losing. And so it's a very polarized perspective of what, of winning and losing, of success and failure. And that means that the parameters for success are sometimes, they can be different depending on different areas of our life. And sometimes they can be in conflict with each other. So trying to figure out what is going to be successful, what's going to make me successful, or making me feel like, oh yeah, I do have a sense of self-worth, can be a minefield, can be really, really confusing for individuals.
Why do some people struggle with it more than others?
I think that's a really good question, and it's just one that I do think about. And I think sometimes it has to do with maybe the factors in which we grow up in, maybe some that we can talk about risk factors and protective factors. So individuals growing up in an environment where they don't have a good support structure, where they're not receiving unconditional love and support, right, are more at risk of feeling diminished in terms of their self-worth than an individual that is growing up in a protective kind of environment where you have that unconditional love and support, you're having messages that, that you have value no matter what, which can buffer, if you like, the societal view that our worth comes from winning, our worth comes from being good at things, at having a specific skill, or excelling and having accolades and things like that. So I think that that's what makes it more, some individuals more susceptible than others.
I've been professionally in positions where I've perhaps been asked to do a piece of presenting or a piece of work where I've thought I'm not good enough. People aren't going to want to listen to me. And nobody said that to me because I've been asked to do the job, but something triggers me to have that. So what is it? What is imposter syndrome? How does it make people feel? What are they displaying when they're being like me and going, I'm not good enough to do that? Questioning my own worth. What's making me be like that?
Well, think about it this way. From a very, very young age in our society, right, children are being measured and categorized according to their academic progress and their developmental progress. And they are then pigeonholed, they're labeled, right? If you're not academically or you don't find as a child things, academically more inclined, and then you feel as a child, you start to feel that you're being compared to others. So you're internalizing that comparison, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And then you're setted, as you get older, you're put into sets, and that's solidifying that self-belief, or that sense of identity that one begins to create from childhood, right? That, I'm good at this, I'm not good at this. And our education system is the first encounter really with that message that, it's about excelling. It's, that you got to find something that you excel at. But also, a child is experiencing judgment from very early on, in this form of measurement, in this form of comparison. They're being, basically the message is, you're judged. And if you're good at this or not good at this, that, we learn to hide aspects of ourselves, the parts of us that are judged as not good or not acceptable socially. We hide those aspects of ourselves. And what happens is, as we become adults, we have a filtered persona, we have a mask, or we have a version of ourselves that's very filtered. What's socially acceptable, the socially acceptable us, right? And then the aspects of us that we keep hidden away that are not socially acceptable for whatever reason. So for many individuals, it doesn't matter, and the interesting thing about imposter syndrome is that it's very often found in individuals who are excelling academically or, professionally. It's individuals who've just been promoted, individuals who, they're moving up in some way and they're feeling success, just like the example you gave about yourself. And yet that internal judgment and comparison that you've experienced from childhood is impacting you in the here and now.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's massive. That's massive for some people. And that bit that you said there about people having this filtered version of themselves, it's almost not showing any weakness. You just present the good stuff. And I guess for some people, that inner critic or that comparison or that self-esteem piece can become quite disabling. And can it lead you to being depressed? Does it have links to mental wellness for depression as well? Is that a link for people that suffer with imposter syndrome?
Absolutely. It can lead to burnout. It can lead to depression. It can lead to lots of different mental health conditions and mental health problems, because you don't feel you can be your authentic self. Mm-hmm. So you're having to put a lot of time and energy in being this filtered version of yourself. And then from a counseling perspective, what I encounter is when people come to counseling, it's because they've reached a point of crisis or a critical point where they just can't keep juggling this persona, this filtered self. It feels inauthentic, and there's like a tug of war that happens between wanting to be authentically ourselves and feeling that we have to be this filtered version of ourselves to be successful.
Sure.
And so in counseling, it's how I see that counseling helps is that it's a non-judgmental environment. It's an environment and a relationship where there's absolute acceptance, unconditional acceptance for that individual. And for the first time for many individuals, it's the first time that they can actually put the masks down. They can feel that those parts of them that are usually hidden away can come forward, because it's the whole person that we need, right? We want a person to feel whole, to feel integrated, to feel complete. And the way to do that is to remove judgment and to bring in acceptance and compassion. And then I model that for people so that they can do that for themselves. And when you start being compassionate with yourself, when you start being accepting of all of yourself, that's where the healing really happens. And that's when the authentic you can really come to be.
So you've talked there about when you're helping clients and people are coming and talking to you. What if we're listening and we're not seeing a counsellor at this time, but we want to help ourselves with imposter syndrome because we're aware that it's a thing in our lives? How can you help yourself to manage your imposter syndrome?
So I would say the first thing that I would recommend is, one is the acknowledgement that there is this conditioning that's happening in you. So, and being able to attribute that a lot of that lack of self-worth is coming from something that's not you. It's coming from things that you've accepted to be true, from belief system, maybe let's put it that way, from a belief system that you've adopted. But that doesn't mean that you have to continue to believe that or to accept that. So something that I think is really helpful is to maybe almost write down a list of what are your values. What are the things that you value as an individual? And what are the things that you want to prioritize in your life? And then maybe you can do another list as what do you feel you have to do? What are the shoulds? And that's a really good way of distinguishing. The language I have to, I need to, I should is usually the conditioned inner critic or the conditioned, the conditioning that we've received, that we've internalized. And it becomes a command for us. You have to do this, you should do that. So if you're writing a list of all the I have to's and I shoulds, that's usually an indication of where your conditioning is. Mm-hmm. And then you compare that to what you really want. What do you really value? I value family, I value relationships above money. I value, being present in the moment rather than constantly worrying about the future. When we start writing a list of all of those values and things that we really appreciate, that is the real us coming through. And I think that can be really helpful.
You mentioned there the inner critic. Mm-hmm. What is this inner critic and how does that what's its relationship with imposter syndrome? What is it?
So the inner critic is that voice of judgment that we internalize.
Right.
Right? And that's the voice of judgment from society. It could be from judgments we've received in our life experiences, judgments that we've come to make ourselves based on things that we've observed in others that we don't like. And we internalize those judgments and it becomes a voice. It becomes a little inner voice or a set of rules that are constantly compelling us, is the word, to behave in a particular way. And that inner critic is really self-destructive. It's not coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of judgment, and it's not something that brings health to us or well-being. So, the inner critic is something that we really need to understand. Just because we hear it in our head, it's not us. It's really not us. It's not, yes, it may have our voice because we're hearing it in our head, but those judgments are judgments that we've internalized from outside of us.
And that then feeds your imposter syndrome.
And that feeds your imposter syndrome.
So is an inner critic ever helpful?
No.
No. Okay.
No,
Get rid of your inner critic. You heard it here first. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I would say, look, it's helpful having an inner voice for sure. We can't help it. That's the way we're kind of designed. But, it's about turning your inner critic into maybe an inner coach, somebody. But I mean, one of those coaches that is very reassuring, that's pointing out the good as well as, as the bad, that it has more of a holistic perspective, right? Or we can call it your inner cheerleader, somebody that's always cheering for you. That's much better than an inner critic, right? Or an inner Buddha, a little wise voice that's kind of guiding you along, to see the full perspective. What we want is the full perspective. An inner critic is not a full perspective. The inner critic is only looking at the negatives. It's only judging, and it's not seeing the big picture.
I sort of thinking like this inner critic is like a little person that lives in my brain. And if something's gone wrong, and you reflect on it, and we're always taught to get feedback, think about it. And sometimes that inner critic doesn't leave you alone. Could have done this better. That was really wrong. I've screwed up here. How can you silence the inner critic to go, okay, you've said your piece now, off you go. I don't want to hear this anymore. Is there a technique to shut your inner critic up?
You've just pointed to it. You've just said, you challenge it, you talk to it, you turning it into a little character, into a little something, and understanding that it's not you. It's this kind of voice of society, but it can take any shape or form. So if you're visualizing it as a little gremlin or as a little monkey on your shoulder, that's really helpful. Imagery is really powerful, and then we can talk to it. We can tell it off. We can be like, oh, it's time for you to be quiet. You're not being helpful. And then you reverse it, because whatever it's telling you, you have to flip it. You've got to reverse it, because you don't want to diminish yourself. You want to edify yourself. You want to build yourself up. Mm-hmm. So if your inner critic's telling you, oh, you're useless, you're never going to do this, be like, whoosh, there's no talking now. I am going to do this. I can definitely do this. Of course I can. And so you start developing a relationship with that inner cheerleader where you're supporting yourself, or that inner coach where you're, you're not being delusional. You're not just focusing on only the positives, but you have to balance the negative with the positives.
So people thinking, this inner critic, right? This monkey or on my shoulder, or this little character or whatever it is that's talking at me. Has there been an increase in people's experiences of this inner critic because of the rise in social media? Is it linked?
I would say so, personally from my own observations, and I'm sure there's many studies out there that probably have identified the same. And the reason I say that is because a lot of social media platforms, just a lot of social media platforms out there are designed to portray something, right? But we think about Instagram, it's about putting photographs up of things. But it's not so much the putting photos up and the videos up of things. It's more about the fact that we've internalized comparison, right? Comparative judgment from a very early age. So what we're seeing, we're judging, we're comparing ourselves to what we're seeing on the screen. So in themselves, those social media sites, there's nothing wrong with them. The danger is coming from the internal comparative judgment, from our own selves. That's where the danger comes from. That's where we start to, that little inner critic is then triggered and is off.
And is that in all aspects of our lives for social media? Or is it just looking at people's gorgeous living rooms?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not one who goes on social media an awful lot. Do you have a specific example? What are you thinking of?
I think parenting. Okay, so let's listen to, let's talk about, people listening who have a young family. And there are so many people out there documenting the perfect activities that they do with their children. And I have a real thing that I hate paint. You heard it here first. I hate paint. And yet the crafty mums that are on Instagram, which at some point I've chosen to follow, almost give me a feeling, they've not done that, I've done that, but I have a feeling of watching their posts that go, I haven't hand-painted rocks with my children this weekend, or done something where we've done paint by numbers, or we've worked out some phonics but using coloured paint. And therefore I have a feeling of I'm not as good as that parent. How do I manage that? What do I do? Do I stop following them, or can I follow them and have a different perspective on what I'm seeing?
Well, what do you intuitively feel if you ask yourself that question?
Well, I think I would sometimes go, I should just click unfollow and go, actually, this doesn't make me feel good. And then sometimes I go, actually, that's a good idea. And I save it. And I sort of have a catalogue on my phone of things that are like your rainy day ideas, whether I'll ever do them. But it's almost like I've acknowledged it as a good idea and said we might do that one day. And that helps me a little bit. Yeah.
So you see how intuitively you sense what you need to unfollow, right? And I think this is the key for everyone. Listen to your intuition, because that judgment might be kicking in, but what you've done there is that you've acknowledged that there are times when we recognize for our own selves what's not healthy for us. And maybe we're not in the right mindset in that moment of time to be following people like that, because that inner critic is going to be triggered. But we can also, in some ways, almost like you did there as well, we may find or acknowledge that there's a time where actually that's a good idea. And that comparison, that judgment is just left because you're so focused on the fact that it's actually a good idea. It becomes more of a helpful thing. So you're saving it for a rainy day, or as an idea for future. So it's about trusting that intuitive, right, kind of dialogue that we have ourselves, or that feeling or that sense. We do know what we're ready for and what we're not ready for and what we need. Sometimes we need to unfollow for a period of time, indefinitely maybe. And sometimes we dip in and out, and we just follow that intuition because everyone's different.
I think it's huge for parents. I mean, I'm sure in every walk of life and every part of your journey that you're on, but I think it's huge for parents because we have this pressure to be seen, to be doing the good stuff. It sort of defines you as a parent, and you look and you see other people doing things and think, I'm not as good. Are there mental games that you can play with yourself to sort of get you to unpick that a bit so that you're not always comparing?
Yeah, so I think interesting is the language, because you said good, right? And anytime we use the word good or bad, what's a good parent, right? That's usually, that's a label that we've picked up. We've been conditioned with a good parent. A good parent sits with their child and, does rock painting and arts and crafts and teaches them their alphabet before they start school. And we have all of these ideas of what a really good parent is, but where does that come from? Does that come from us? Has it come from watching other things? Or is it, so we start making assumptions of what a good parent is and what a bad parent is. And then we're judging ourselves based on whatever it is that we've come to the conclusion. So, again, it's that language is indicating that that we have a very polarized perspective of, of how we should be behaving. So maybe just be mindful of just catch yourself, am I being very black or white here? Am I being very judgmental? And I think it's identifying that's my inner critic. That's my inner critic. And, is this being helpful to me right now? But I don't know if I've answered your question. I feel like I've kind of gone off on my own tangent.
No, I think that's really helpful because it's that challenging yourself. I think it's challenging that inner critic. I was actually thinking to myself, I might go away and write a list of what I actually think a good parent is. Because I probably, if I really challenge myself, don't think necessarily that rocks or craft is the definition of a good parent. It would probably be love and the nurturing side and warmth and belonging and all that stuff that I really know is good family values. So yeah. Food for thought for me, massive.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully for everyone, I think this is what I really urge people to do, is to really take that step back when we're really judging ourselves, and it's checking in with our own values, checking in with what is really, because what's a good parent for you, I mean, is not the same as what's a good parent for someone else.
Sure.
Although we think we all should be a particular way, when we actually logically think about it, we have to accept that there's going to be differences between all of us. Not everyone is, has the time to do those things. And if you do, that's wonderful. And if you don't, that's absolutely fine as well, because you're giving in a different way to your children. So we have to be able to accept that we're all uniquely, right, in our own unique circumstances, and we're all able to give in a unique way to our children. And so it's a great practice to check in with what is a good parent to me.
Yeah,
what do I think is a good parent?
So if we just move that over to the workplace now, because obviously we've talked a lot about, how we can have almost a word with ourselves and brush that inner critic off our shoulder. Get out of here. I'm not listening to you. But if you are working with somebody who effectively their imposter syndrome, their inner critic is telling them that they can't do something, and you're witnessing that, is it possible as a colleague or a line manager to actually be able to help someone overcome that, and you help them as opposed to them doing it themselves? Is there something that you can do?
Yeah, I do think that relationship between, say, for example, line manager and employee, or mentor and mentoree at work, or, coach and an employee, whatever that relationship is, that relationship really, I think, is the most helpful thing that can help someone. And it's about helping them, again, getting them to be more reflective, right? Helping that employee, helping that individual be more reflective about, what do you think is important in your role? What do you feel? Because they may have a perception of what's expected of them that doesn't actually match with the reality of it. And so if that communication can be had, if that conversation could be had between line manager and employee, for example, what do you think is expected of you in this role? Where do you feel that you're falling short? Usually doing a review is a good period of, when these kind of conversations often happen. That's the opportunity then for that line manager to say, actually, I think that this is what, you're doing great. This is what these are what I see as your strengths. And it's trying to help shift that employee's perspective about themselves and about the role and what's expected of them.
Because I think, we also have to acknowledge that, I think about us in work, sometimes things go wrong, right? And it's really important that we learn from it, but we don't have this inner critic constantly saying, right, you can't do that. It's gone wrong once, or there was an error, you can't do it again. And is there a way in work that we can help each other manage those challenges?
Yeah, so I think it's really important, the work culture, you know, and so that's obviously something that, you know, I'd say that the top tier work really filter down the culture of the work, right? Like the culture that's established in a workplace. And it's, you know, if that message that's coming across to employees, and it's coming across how through the line managers, it's coming right, it's coming across through how an employee is communicated with. What are the implied messages and explicit messages about making errors? And it's about psychological safety at work. So if an employee is feeling safe to make mistakes, safe to express themselves and to communicate their concerns, then that employee has, and all employees generally are going to be more creative. You know, studies show that when there's psychological safety at work, there's increased creativity, increased productivity, increased cooperative working, where people are more cooperative with each other. So the business, definitely, the company benefits from creating psychological safety. And that psychological safety has to be embedded through management. It has to be communicated, expressed through the behaviors and language and actions of management.
We've covered so much ground and we could talk for a very long time. And I'm sure there's people listening going, what are you going to talk about next? And we have to wrap up now. But I think the whole point of, I knew about imposter syndrome, I knew the phrase, but the fact that it was this inner critic and that we need to find our way to brush off this inner critic. I find it really helpful. Jaimie, thank you. It's been a really inspirational conversation. If you, and we always do this at the end of our podcast, if you wanted our listeners to take away something, one thing from today's discussion together, what would you want it to be?
I think it's, you know, take time to check in with yourself and really come to understand what matters to you. And when you're living according to your own values and you're living according to your own priorities, you're feeling like you're more of an you're authentically yourself. And that feels really natural and it feels really good. It's very liberating. So you can liberate yourself by really tuning in and exploring for yourself what matters and living according to what matters to you. Not what society tells you should do, but what matters to you. That's, I guess, my takeaway.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Folks, you've been listening to the Family Health Podcast by Mini First Aid. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast because we have a wealth of episodes coming in your direction and they will drop onto your regular platform if you are a subscriber. It's also worth following Mini First Aid across our social channels, and you can sign up to our newsletter to receive regular family health advice as well as the notifications for the Family Health Podcast. Continue listening to Family Health Podcast across all of your regular podcast platforms, and don't forget to tell your friends. If you found today's episode really helpful, share it with a friend. If you would like us to cover any other health related topic, something you've not heard from us before, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We always love to hear from our listeners because they really govern what you as our listeners want to listen to. You've been listening to Family Health Podcast. Thank you for listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. I hope you found our podcast really useful and informative. If you want to know more about Mini First Aid classes, courses, qualification courses or first aid supplies, please do visit minifirstaid.co.uk or look us up on all your favourite social platforms at Mini First Aid. And just a little reminder from me and our sponsor, Things Happen, that if reviewing your life insurance is still on your to-do list, take time to get in touch with a Things Happen advisor today.